Cliff Burton's death in 1986 is one of those moments in rock history that feels like time just stopped. A gut punch that left Metallica and millions of fans reeling. The band was in Sweden on their Master of Puppets European tour, riding high with momentum and their music taking over the world. Cliff, at just 24, was the long-haired, denim-wearing genius whose bass did not just play notes but roared, screamed, and growled like a lead guitar. He was not simply the bassist, he was the secret weapon, the man who turned Metallica's sound from raw thrash into something almost orchestral with his distorted riffs and classical influences. In the early hours of September 27th, fate took a cruel turn. The tour bus, barreling down the road near Ljungby in Sweden, reportedly hit black ice and lost control. It swerved, flipped, and in that terrifying chaos, Cliff was thrown through the window and pinned underneath. In the dead of night on a lonely Swedish road, Metallica lost their backbone, and the world lost a talent that had not even reached full bloom. What makes Cliff's story strike so deeply is how young he was and how much he had already achieved in such a short time. His bass solos were not background noise. They were events that often stole the show. Tracks like Anesthesia Pulling Teeth made listeners rethink what a bass could even accomplish in heavy music. He had this aura, a mix of quiet confidence and rebellious fire, as though he knew he was shaping something different in the world of metal. Cliff was also the band's moral compass in many ways, described by friends and bandmates as grounded, the one who could cut through chaos with honesty. He had won his place in Metallica through sheer talent, and had secured his bunk the night of the crash through a simple coin toss with Kirk Hammett. Ironically, that coin toss put him in the spot that led to his tragic fate. It remains one of those cruel twists that feels straight out of a tragedy, except this was no fiction but a devastating reality. The aftermath left the band shattered and unsure of how to move forward. There was talk of disbanding because replacing someone like Cliff Burton seemed impossible, yet in true metal spirit, they chose to continue. Jason Newsted was brought in to fill the role, and while he carried the music forward, Cliff's presence never truly left. For fans and the band alike, the thought of what might have been always lingers. If Cliff had lived, Metallica's sound might have evolved in even more daring and experimental directions, but that chapter will forever remain unwritten. His influence remains undeniable, woven into the very DNA of metal. Even decades later, fans travel to the crash site in Sweden, leaving flowers, pics, and messages as if it were a sacred ground of rock history. His legacy echoes every time Master of Puppets is blasted through speakers or whenever a bassist dares to push boundaries in his spirit. Cliff Burton may have left this world far too soon, but he left it heavier, bolder, and unshakably alive. His death marked a tragic end, but his legacy stands as pure immortality. Our final story takes us to the crystal clear waters off Queensland, Australia, a place where adventure and beauty often meet. It was September 4th, 2006, at Bat Reef near Port Douglas. The turquoise expanse of the Great Barrier Reef shimmered beneath a perfect blue sky. For Steve Irwin, the beloved crocodile hunter, it was supposed to be just another day of filming. At 44, Irwin had built a worldwide reputation as a fearless wildlife conservationist. With his khaki shorts, infectious grin, and endless enthusiasm, he turned animal documentaries into thrilling, family-friendly television, inspiring millions to respect and protect nature. That morning, Steve and his crew were working on a project called Ocean's Deadliest. Unlike his usual heart-pounding encounters with crocodiles or venomous snakes, this shoot was meant to be relatively calm, showcasing the reef's colorful marine life. But when rough weather diverted their plans, the team headed to Bat Reef, an area teeming with rays, fish, and coral. There, Steve spotted a massive stingray gliding across the sandy bottom and decided to get a close-up for the cameras. Stingrays are typically shy and rarely attack humans, so the moment seemed like a safe way to capture more footage. With cameraman Justin Lyons filming, Steve floated just above the 7-foot ray. At first, everything appeared peaceful. Then, in an instant, that calm dissolved into chaos. The stingray whipped its muscular tail upward, driving its sharp barb into Steve's chest again and again. A rapid, defensive reflex triggered when the animal felt cornered. One strike pierced directly into his heart. Lyons later described the attack as a blur of motion, like hundreds of strikes in seconds. Steve, who had faced down some of the planet's fiercest predators, was gravely wounded by a creature few would consider dangerous. The crew pulled him from the water and rushed him back toward their boat, desperately performing CPR. But the damage was catastrophic. Steve's final words, as remembered by Lyons, were heartbreakingly simple. "I'm dying." Within minutes, the man who had made the world fall in love with crocodiles, snakes, and sharks was gone. News of his death spread across the globe within hours, leaving fans stunned. For many, it felt unthinkable. Steve Irwin, who had handled man-eating reptiles and wrestled massive crocodiles, felled by a normally docile stingray. Tributes poured in from every corner of the world. Politicians, celebrities, and millions of ordinary people mourned the loss of a man who blended daring adventure with a deep love for animals. A memorial service at the Australia Zoo, attended by thousands and broadcast to millions, celebrated Steve as more than an entertainer. He was remembered as an educator, a conservationist, and a champion of wildlife whose enthusiasm inspired a generation to care about the natural world. In the years since, his family has carried that torch. Terry, Bindi, and Robert Irwin have expanded the zoo into a major hub for conservation, continuing the mission Steve started. Through documentaries, wildlife rescues, and education programs, they ensure his voice and vision live on. For Steve Irwin, the Great Barrier Reef was meant to be another backdrop for storytelling, a chance to share the magic of the ocean with his audience. Instead, it became the setting for one of television's most heartbreaking losses, a stark reminder that even the most experienced adventurers are not immune to nature's unpredictability. Steve's legacy, however, remains unsinkable, a bold, joyful call to protect the wild places and creatures that make our world extraordinary. Steve Prefontaine's story is one of those bittersweet legends that continues to echo through the world of sports. It was 1975 in Eugene, Oregon, a city that had become the heartbeat of American distance running, and Prefontaine was its crown jewel. Known simply as Pre, he wasn't just another runner turning laps on the track. He was a showman, a rebel, and a force of nature wrapped up in a wiry frame. At just 24 years old, he had already achieved stardom, filling stadiums with fans who cheered as if they were at a rock concert. He had charisma that extended far beyond the track, representing not only the University of Oregon, but also the new rebellious identity of American athletics. However, his promising life came to an abrupt and tragic end on May 30th, 1975, in a car crash that has remained as infamous as his incredible running career. That night began like any other post-meet celebration. Prefontaine had competed earlier in the day and later joined friends for a gathering where his magnetic personality shone as it always did. After midnight, he drove his 1973 MGB convertible through the winding and hilly roads of Eugene, a stylish car that suited his fiery image but offered little protection in a crash. After dropping off his passengers, he was alone when tragedy struck. The official account states that his car drifted across the center line on Skyline Boulevard, hit a curb, collided with a rock wall, and flipped, leaving him trapped beneath the vehicle. He died of traumatic asphyxiation, crushed under the overturned car, only blocks away from home. His blood alcohol level was reported to be 0.16%, more than the legal limit, and this detail shaped much of the public conversation around his death. Some accepted it as a case of drinking and driving, while others insisted that poor visibility or perhaps another car on the road might have forced him into a split-second reaction. Arguments over the true cause remain unresolved even today, feeding the aura of mystery that surrounds his final hours. What makes this loss feel even heavier is not only the way he died, but what he symbolized. Prefontaine was never content to sit quietly in the middle of the pack. He was a front-runner in every sense, both in racing strategy and in his approach to life. He challenged authority, fought for athletes' rights, and embodied a fearless spirit that inspired an entire generation. He also became an early symbol for Nike, giving the fledgling company its first taste of sporting identity. When he died, the running community lost more than a record setter. They lost a revolutionary voice who seemed destined for greatness beyond the track. His memorial, known as Pre's Rock, stands at the crash site and has become a pilgrimage spot for runners who leave shoes, medals, and notes in his honor. His death was tragic, yet his life remains an enduring lesson in living boldly and unapologetically. Prefontaine burned bright, raced hard, and though his story ended too soon, it cemented his status as an unforgettable legend whose spirit continues to inspire decades later. Our next story takes us deep into the wilds of Alaska, a place where beauty and danger exist side by side. It was October 2003 in Katmai National Park, a sprawling, untamed expanse along Alaska's rugged coast. For more than a decade, Timothy Treadwell had made this wilderness his summer home, sharing the landscape with some of the largest grizzly bears in North America. To his supporters, Timothy was a passionate protector of wildlife, a man determined to build a bridge between humans and animals most people feared. To his critics, he was a thrill-seeker pushing the limits of common sense, daring fate one season too many. Treadwell wasn't always the rugged bear man. Born in 1957, he once dreamed of Hollywood fame, hoping to carve out a career as an actor. But after years of frustration and setbacks, he reinvented himself completely, adopting a new persona as a self-styled guardian of grizzlies. His boundless enthusiasm and almost childlike wonder made him a compelling figure. Schools invited him to speak, television crews followed him into the wild, and he even appeared on late-night talk shows. Alongside a friend, he co-founded Grizzly People, a nonprofit aimed at educating the public about bear conservation. With a video camera always in hand, he recorded nearly every moment of his life among the bears, creating an extraordinary archive of their world and his own. By the summer of 2003, Timothy wasn't alone. He was joined by his girlfriend, Amy Huguenard, a 37-year-old physician's assistant from Colorado. Amy admired Timothy's dedication, but never fully shared his comfort around the massive predators. She often felt uneasy in Katmai's remote corners, yet her affection and loyalty kept her by his side, even when the wilderness felt threatening. That fall, the pair set up camp at Kaflia Bay, a harsh and isolated area far from rangers or other visitors. It was late in the season, a dangerous period when bears become increasingly aggressive, competing for scarce food before hibernation. Typically, Timothy ended his expeditions by late September, but that year he chose to extend their stay, hoping to capture more footage of the animals he adored. On the evening of October 5th, disaster struck. A massive male grizzly, later identified as Bear 141, emerged from the shadows and lumbered into their campsite without warning. What followed was pure horror. Their video camera, left rolling with the lens cap still on, caught only the sounds. Timothy's panicked shouts, the bear's deep guttural roars, and Amy's terrified screams as she tried in vain to drive the animal away. The attack lasted only a few minutes, yet its outcome was devastating. When rangers finally reached the remote site, they discovered a grim tableau, the remains of both Timothy and Amy lying near their collapsed tent. A severed arm, still wearing Timothy's ticking wristwatch, was found nearby. Inside the stomach of Bear 141 were human remains and scraps of clothing, leaving no doubt about the violence that had unfolded. For safety, a younger bear seen lingering near the camp was also euthanized. News of the tragedy spread quickly, shocking the world. Katmai had gone 85 years without a single fatal bear attack. To some, Timothy's death felt inevitable, the tragic conclusion of a man who believed he could live as one with apex predators. To others, it was the ultimate price for an unwavering devotion to nature's raw beauty. 2 years later, director Werner Herzog released Grizzly Man, weaving Timothy's own footage into a haunting documentary that reignited debate. Was Treadwell a hero who sacrificed everything for the creatures he loved, or a reckless dreamer who put himself and Amy in mortal peril? Whatever your view, Timothy Treadwell's story stands as a stark reminder of the razor-thin line between awe and danger when humans walk unguarded into the wild. Roland Ratzenberger was the kind of racer who chased his dreams with the intensity of a kid chasing the ice cream truck on a hot summer day, and in 1994, he finally made it to Formula One. Now, F1 isn't exactly the place for a laid-back Sunday drive. It's high-octane chaos, metal screaming around corners at speeds that make most of us feel queasy just watching. Roland, an Austrian with a heart full of determination and probably a caffeine addiction rivaling a coffee shop's monthly sales, joined the Simtek team, a scrappy little outfit in the grand theater of Formula One giants. His first few outings had been humble, but he was hungry, and Imola was his chance to shine. The San Marino Grand Prix wasn't just any weekend, it was where legends raced, and as fate would have it, where the course of racing history would twist dramatically. Qualifying for F1 races is basically a stress test for both driver and car. You're hurtling around a circuit, hugging curves like you're in a high-speed dance-off, trying to shave milliseconds off every lap. Roland was pushing hard on April 30th, 1994, on the Villeneuve Straight, his car slicing the air, engine roaring like a dragon that had just discovered energy drinks. But the universe can be cruel, and the Simtek wasn't exactly a fortress of invincibility. Earlier, the front wing of his car, basically the thing that keeps your car glued to the track instead of flying off like a giant paper airplane, got damaged when he hit a curb. Most people in that situation would pit, check the damage, maybe mutter a few colorful words and calm down. But Roland, ever the optimist, thought, Nope, let's see what this baby can still do. He stayed out, pushing the car to its limits, believing that maybe, just maybe, a miracle lap was still possible. And then the tragic inevitability happened. At over 300 kilometers per hour, the weakened front wing gave way. Physics didn't negotiate. It simply reminded everyone that speed is not something you can argue with. The car shot straight into the concrete barrier. 1 second, Roland was there, controlling his machine with skill and guts, and the next, the crash was over. Emergency crews rushed to him, but the damage was catastrophic. Roland Ratzenberger, who had spent his life chasing dreams in fast lanes, didn't survive. The news hit the F1 world like a meteor. It had been 12 years since the last driver died during a race weekend, and the shockwaves were amplified by the fact that this was just the prelude to one of motorsport's most infamous weekends. What followed was a sobering wake-up call for the entire sport. Ayrton Senna's death the very next day overshadowed Roland's tragic end, but Ratzenberger's loss wasn't forgotten by those who understood the fragility of life at 300 kilometers per hour. Safety measures in Formula One, which had always been evolving, suddenly went into overdrive. Tracks were redesigned, cars strengthened, and the drivers' helmets and suits became something that could survive what used to be unsurvivable. In a weird way, Roland's brief time on the grand stage became a catalyst for change, a reminder that the thrill of speed comes with consequences, and that even a small team with a big dream can leave a lasting mark. Roland Ratzenberger wasn't a world champion. He didn't have podiums lined up like trophies on a shelf, and his career stats don't look impressive on paper, but in the hearts of motorsport fans, he embodies the relentless spirit of a racer, bold, daring, and unafraid to chase glory even when the odds are stacked impossibly high. Imola 1994 reminds us of the fine line between triumph and tragedy, the thin thread that separates victory from disaster, and the kind of courage it takes to live and race without holding back. In the end, Roland's story isn't just about a crash. It's about a dreamer who refused to slow down, who chased his passion at the very edge, and who left the world forever changed, both in memory and in the safety of the sport he loved. His name may not fill highlight reels, but his legacy runs deep in the veins of Formula One, a quiet testament to determination, bravery, and the fleeting brilliance of chasing a dream at full throttle. Our next story takes us to the heart of Africa, where a peaceful safari turned into a scene of unimaginable tragedy. It was August 2001 in Kenya's Tsavo East National Park, a vast, sun-baked wilderness known for its elephants, lions, and sweeping savanna. Among the tourists exploring its beauty was Jacky Boxberger, one of France's most celebrated middle-distance runners. Born in 1949, Boxberger had risen to stardom as a teenager. At just 19, he shattered the world junior record in the 1,500 meters and competed in the 1968 Olympic Games in Mexico City, placing 6th in the final. Over the next 2 decades, he became a fixture in international athletics, running in 4 Olympics between 1968 and 1984. He twice won the Paris Marathon, took the Marrakesh Marathon in 1987, and collected multiple French national titles. Even a serious knee injury during military service couldn't dim his determination. By the time he retired, Boxberger was a legend, admired not just for his endurance, but for his passion for the sport. Away from the track, he was known as a devoted family man and an avid photographer. That summer, he traveled with his wife and daughter to Kenya, eager to capture the country's landscapes and wildlife through his camera lens. On an August afternoon near the Voi region of Tsavo East, the family stopped for a picnic. Always drawn to the perfect shot, Boxberger walked about 200 yards from the car to film a nearby elephant. The massive creature appeared calm as it grazed in the distance, and for a moment it must have seemed like the perfect opportunity. But elephants, despite their reputation for gentleness, can turn dangerously protective without warning, especially if they feel threatened or surprised. As Boxberger focused through his viewfinder, the elephant suddenly shifted its posture, then charged. Witnesses say it happened in seconds. The animal closed the distance, wrapped its trunk around Boxberger, and hurled him violently against a tree. The sound of the impact shattered the quiet plains. Before anyone could react, the elephant struck again, trampling him under its enormous weight. His wife and daughter watched in shock, powerless to intervene. Rangers and guides rushed to the scene, but it was too late. Boxberger died from his injuries at the age of 52. News of his death spread quickly to France, leaving the sports world stunned. Headlines called it a bitter irony, a man who had conquered Olympic tracks and grueling marathons, lost not to time or illness but to the untamed strength of Africa's wildlife. In the years after, his daughter, Claire Boxberger, followed in his footsteps, becoming a middle-distance runner herself and honoring her father's athletic spirit. For fans and fellow athletes, his passing was more than a freak accident. It was a sobering reminder that even the most disciplined and accomplished among us are vulnerable when stepping into nature's domain. Jacky Boxberger's life, filled with records, victories, and personal devotion, ended far from the roar of stadium crowds. In its place was the thunder of an elephant's charge across the African savanna, a tragic testament to the raw power of the wild. Albert Camus, the celebrated French philosopher, author, and Nobel Prize winner, met a tragic and sudden end on January 4, 1960, in a car accident near Villeneuve in France. At just 46 years old, his life and career were abruptly cut short, leaving the literary world and philosophical circles in profound shock. Camus was a passenger in a Simca 1300, driven by his friend Michel Gallimard, the nephew of the renowned publisher Gaston Gallimard. The car, traveling at high speed along the quiet French roads, suddenly skidded and collided with a tree, killing Camus instantly. Gallimard survived the initial impact but passed away a few days later from the injuries sustained in the crash. The suddenness of the event, a moment of ordinary travel turned fatal in seconds, made the loss even more striking, particularly as Camus was at the height of his intellectual influence, having recently won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1957 and published some of his most enduring works, including The Stranger and The Plague. The accident, while officially considered a tragic mishap, has sometimes been the subject of speculation, with conspiracy theories suggesting external forces due to Camus' political stances. However, historians generally agree that the crash was a tragic accident, the result of speed, road conditions, and the inherent unpredictability of life. Camus' death served as a harsh reminder of the fragility of human existence, the very theme he explored so profoundly in his philosophical works. He often reflected on the absurdity of life, the tension between humanity's search for meaning and the indifference of the universe, and in an almost cruelly ironic twist, his own death mirrored these themes, a sudden, unexpected end to a life defined by contemplation of mortality, ethics, and the human condition. The world mourned the loss of a thinker whose works challenged conventional thought and inspired reflection on freedom, responsibility, and moral integrity. His absence left a void in literature and philosophy that could never truly be filled, but his writings continued to influence generations of readers, scholars, and writers, standing as a testament to the enduring power of ideas even after the loss of the individual who conceived them. In this sense, Camus's death is not only remembered as a personal tragedy, but also as a moment that highlighted the fleeting nature of life and the unpredictable forces that shape it. The car crash that ended his life remains a historical point of reflection on both the randomness of fate and the enduring significance of human thought. While the details of the accident are grim, the high-speed collision, the sudden loss of life, the grief of friends and family, the legacy Camus left behind endures far beyond the physical moment of his death. His work continues to provoke thought, inspire inquiry, and remind humanity of the delicate balance between life, death, and the pursuit of meaning. In losing Camus, the world was deprived not only of a brilliant mind, but of a voice capable of articulating the tension between human hope and the indifference of existence, leaving behind a life's work that continues to challenge, educate, and resonate decades later. Next up is a tragedy that shocked Canada and left wildlife experts scrambling for answers. It was October 27, 2009, on Nova Scotia's Skyline Trail, a rugged 4.3-mile path winding through Cape Breton Highlands National Park. Hikers loved it for its sweeping views of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, especially in autumn when the cliffs glow with reds and golds. But that crisp afternoon, the trail became the setting for something almost without precedent. The victim was Taylor Mitchell, a 19-year-old folk singer from Toronto. Just months earlier, she'd released her debut album, For Your Consideration, earning glowing reviews for her poetic lyrics and warm, earthy voice. That summer, she'd wowed audiences at the Winnipeg Folk Festival, quickly becoming one of Canada's most promising young artists. Between shows on a short Nova Scotia tour, Taylor decided to spend her day off hiking the Skyline Trail, a chance to enjoy the natural world she wrote about so often in her songs. Around 3 p.m., fellow hikers saw her heading back toward the parking lot. Not long after, an American couple on the same path noticed 2 eastern coyotes. Their behavior was off. Instead of fleeing, the animals stood their ground, staring boldly at the pair before melting back into the brush. Moments later, desperate cries echoed from deeper in the woods. Taylor had been attacked. At least 2 coyotes had gone after her as she walked alone. Scattered across the trail were her keys, a small pocket knife, and torn clothing, chilling signs of a frantic struggle. Farther down, hikers found her gravely injured, bleeding heavily, with one of the coyotes still hovering nearby. They managed to drive the animal off long enough to call for help. Paramedics rushed Taylor to a hospital in Chapin. Then she was airlifted to Halifax's Queen Elizabeth II Health Sciences Center. Doctors worked tirelessly, but her wounds were catastrophic. That evening, she died from massive blood loss. She was just 19. Investigators later confirmed the unthinkable. This was the first recorded case of an adult killed by coyotes in Canada, and only the second fatal attack on an adult in all of North America. Typically, coyotes are shy and avoid people, so why had this happened? Some experts speculated the animals might have been fed by visitors, losing their fear of humans. Others pointed out that eastern coyotes in Cape Breton had begun hunting larger prey, like moose, and were developing bolder, more aggressive behavior. Authorities eventually captured 5 coyotes from the area. DNA testing showed at least 3 carried Taylor's blood, confirming their role in the attack. The Skyline Trail was temporarily closed while officials reassessed how to keep visitors safe in wild spaces. Taylor's death sent shockwaves through the music community and the wider public. She had just been nominated for a Canadian Folk Music Award as Young Performer of the Year. Her funeral in Owen Sound, Ontario, was filled with friends, family, and fans remembering a gifted artist whose songs championed kindness and respect for nature. Today, her memory lives on through the Taylor Mitchell Legacy Trust, which funds arts programs and wildlife education. But the haunting events of that day remain a sobering reminder. Even in the most beautiful places, wild animals demand our caution and our respect. Harry Chapin, the celebrated singer-songwriter known for heartfelt hits like Cats in the Cradle and Taxi, lived a life dedicated not just to music, but to making the world a better place. On July 16, 1981, tragedy struck that life abruptly. Chapin, only 38 years old, was driving his Volkswagen Rabbit on the Long Island Expressway in New York, heading to a free benefit concert at Eisenhower Park in East Meadow, a testament to his lifelong commitment to charitable causes. What should have been an ordinary afternoon for a man devoted to his craft and philanthropy became the day the world lost him. Chapin had activated his emergency flashers and slowed to roughly 15 miles per hour, weaving between lanes, when his car was struck from behind by a semi-trailer truck. The impact caused the vehicle to burst into flames. Passers-by and the truck driver were able to pull Chapin from the burning car, but despite their efforts, he was airlifted to Nassau County Medical Center and pronounced dead at 1:05 p.m., with internal bleeding identified as the primary cause. The circumstances of his death have remained somewhat uncertain, with speculation that a heart attack may have occurred either before or after the collision. Complicating matters further, reports indicate that Chapin's driver's license had been revoked due to previous traffic violations, a detail that underscores the tragic unpredictability of the event. The aftermath of Chapin's death saw both grief and legal action. His widow, Sandra Chapin, filed a negligence lawsuit against Supermarkets General, the owner of the truck involved in the crash, and ultimately secured a $12 million judgment. Rather than using the settlement for personal gain, Sandra Chapin redirected it toward charitable causes, including the Harry Chapin Foundation, continuing the humanitarian work that had defined her husband's life. This act not only preserved Chapin's legacy, but also highlighted his lifelong dedication to social causes, particularly his efforts to combat hunger. In many ways, the continuation of these initiatives after his death is a testament to Chapin's influence beyond the world of music, showing that his impact on the world would endure even after his untimely passing. Chapin's death was a profound loss to both the artistic and philanthropic communities. Musically, he left behind a body of work defined by storytelling, empathy, and social awareness. His songs captured human emotion and experience in ways few artists manage, and they continue to resonate decades after his passing. In addition, his humanitarian work, particularly his advocacy for feeding the hungry, has left an enduring mark. Honors such as the renaming of the Lakeside Theater at Eisenhower Park to the Harry Chapin Lakeside Theater and the posthumous Congressional Gold Medal awarded in 1987 reflect the breadth of his influence. Ultimately, Harry Chapin's life and tragic death serve as a reminder of both the fragility of life and the enduring power of compassion. Even in the face of sudden loss, his music and humanitarian legacy continue to inspire, demonstrating that a life committed to creativity and service can leave an indelible mark, far beyond the fleeting span of years. Today's story takes us back to San Francisco, California on a chilly afternoon, January 26, 2001. In the quiet, upscale neighborhood of Pacific Heights, everything seemed calm. But inside the hallways of a luxury apartment building, one of the most shocking tragedies in modern San Francisco history was about to unfold. The victim was Diane Whipple, a 33-year-old lacrosse star and coach. Diane was born in Princeton, New Jersey, and raised by her grandparents in New York. From an early age, she was a gifted athlete. She represented the U.S. twice at the Women's Lacrosse World Cup, and even came close to qualifying for the 1996 Olympics. By 2001, Diane was the head coach of the women's lacrosse team at St. Mary's College in Moraga. She lived with her longtime partner, Sharon Smith, and was loved by colleagues, students, and friends alike. That afternoon, Diane returned home from the grocery store, carrying her bags through the hallway toward her apartment. At the same time, her neighbors, attorneys Robert Knoll and Marjorie Knoller, were handling their two massive Presa Canario dogs, Bane and Hera. These weren't your average pets. They were enormous. Bane weighed around 140 pounds and Hera nearly 100. They'd been bred for fighting and had ties to Paul Cornfed Schneider, a violent Aryan Brotherhood gang member serving life in prison, whom Knoll and Knoller had strangely befriended and adopted. For months, residents in the building had complained that the dogs were dangerous. Some neighbors reported being bitten or threatened. A dog walker had even warned Knoller to use muzzles, but nothing changed. As Diane walked past, Bane suddenly lunged. What followed was terrifying. Witnesses later said they heard Diane's screams echo through the hallway as the huge dog attacked. The assault was brutal. She suffered 77 bite wounds to her arms, legs, and torso, with only her scalp and the soles of her feet untouched. Her throat was torn open. Neighbors tried desperately to pull the animal off, and emergency crews rushed Diane to the hospital, but it was too late. She died from massive blood loss. That same day, Bane was euthanized. Hera was seized and later put down as well. Public outrage exploded. These weren't stray animals. They were known threats, and their owners had been warned again and again. By March 2001, both Knoll and Knoller were charged. Knoller faced second-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter, while Knoll was charged with involuntary manslaughter. Both were also convicted of keeping a dangerous animal. The case was so high-profile, it had to be moved to Los Angeles. Knoller tried to claim she'd attempted to stop the attack, even suggesting that Diane's perfume might have triggered the dogs, a comment that only fueled public anger. In 2002, she was convicted of second-degree murder under implied malice, meaning she knew the risk her dogs posed but ignored it. After years of appeals, her conviction was upheld, and in 2008 she was sentenced to 15 years to life. Knoll served a 4-year sentence, was paroled in 2003, and died in 2018. Sharon Smith later filed a civil suit and won $1.5 million, donating part of it to St. Mary's lacrosse program. The case set a legal precedent, proving pet owners can face serious criminal charges if they knowingly put others in danger. For Diane Whipple, a life filled with achievement and mentorship ended just steps from her own front door, a horrifying and completely preventable tragedy.